everyone and welcome back. Today we are going to dive into a complex and fascinating psychological phenomenon, Stockholm Syndrome. I've encountered many questions about this condition. Often it sparks confusion and also curiosity. And you are very likely to heard of it before, maybe on TV series or maybe some movies. But what does it really mean? How does it develop and what we can learn from it about our mind and our behavior? In today's video, we're going to answer all these questions and we're going to also look at psychology behind Stockholm Syndrome. And we're going also to discuss its real-world implications. So let's get started. Stockholm Syndrome took its name after the bank robbery that happened in Sweden in Stockholm in 1973, where there was a hostage situation. So people that were kept hostage in a bank for over 6 days. They developed an unexpected bond with the captor. So even after the order was finished, the hostages, they were even defending the captors. This paradoxical reaction where the victims, they develop attachment, a bond with the captor or with the abuser caught attention of psychologists and also the public. We can say in short that Stockholm Syndrome describes unusual psychological reaction where the hostages develop positive or even sympathetic attachment with their captor, even though they are being held against their will. Stockholm Syndrome isn't an official psychiatric diagnosis because it doesn't appear within the DSM-5, which is diagnostic manual for mental health disorders, but it is widely recognized as psychological response to trauma. This typically happens in situations when the person's being held captive against their will or when they are being abused, and within the circumstances they still identify with the captor, with the abuser, or they even develop a sympathizing relationship with the captor or the abuser. But then you might ask, why does it happen? So to help us understand it, let's break it down. Stockholm Syndrome is rooted in our survival instincts. When faced with life-threatening situation, the brain activates the fight or flight response. But when neither fighting or fleeing is possible, the brain may resort to another survival strategy, forming a bond with the captor. So here it is how it works. First of all, we have perceived threat. So the victims, they will believe that their lives are threat because the captors, they will use intimidation and different threats to exert the power control over their victims. Secondly, we have prolonged isolation. Isolation actually fosters dependency on the captor for the survival, for the basic needs, and even for the information. Thirdly, we have small acts of kindness. So in situations when the captor shows even small kindness, such as giving food or water, with time the hostages, the victims, they might start understanding this as humanity and kindness, and then as a result of that they might start to develop gratitude, being thankful to the captor for sparing their life, for keeping them alive with food and water. And that can happen even in situations when the victims, when the hostages encounter abuse. Next, we have identification with the captor. So here, if the hostages, they see the captor as the only source of safety and survival, they might actually identify with their beliefs, their morals, their values. And lastly, we have cognitive dissonance. So in some situations, the victims, in order to survive the trauma, they will minimize the threat. So they might reframe the captor as not as threatening, as not aggressive, as not abusive. This psychological shift helps the victim survive the order, but it can have lasting effects on their mental health and relationships. Stockholm Syndrome has been observed in many high-profile cases. One of the most famous one is Patrycja, who was kidnapped by a radical group in 70s. Over time, she began to identify with her captors and even participated in their criminal activities. Another example is J.C. Dugard, who was abducted and then she was kept captive for over 18 years. Despite the abuse she endured, she developed complex relationship with her captor. These cases, they highlight the complexity of Stockholm Syndrome and also challenge our assumptions that sometimes we might make about the victims. It is important to remember that these reactions, they are survival mechanisms, they are not choices, and each case is very unique. Now, let's have a look at psychological and neurological factors that can contribute to development of Stockholm Syndrome. So first of all, we have the cognitive dissonance, and that can be described as psychological discomfort when we hold contradictory beliefs about, for instance, a person. So in situation of the hostage captor, when the captor is abusive, at the same time the captor can also show certain kindness, so provide maybe food and water, or maybe even sometimes say a good word to the hostage, right? And then as a result of that, the hostage might develop this real discomfort about not knowing what they should feel and think about the captor, because on one hand they experience the kindness, on the other hand they experience maybe violence. So to reduce that discomfort, they will minimize the threat, they will minimize the abuse that they are experiencing. Then we have learned helplessness. So this is a state where the person actually perceives themselves as being helpless, and this is developed as a result of them being exposed many times to aversive events. Lastly, we have neurobiological changes. So we know from research that when we as humans are being exposed to prolonged stress, then our body produces high levels of cortisol. And then as a result of that, how we take our decisions and how we regulate our emotions can be severely impacted. And if you would like to learn more about it, I will encourage you to watch one of my videos. Stockholm Syndrome is closely related to trauma bonding, a psychological phenomenon where a victim forms a deep emotional connection with the abuser. This bond is often reinforced by cycle of abuse and intermittent kindness, which creates a sense of dependency and confusion. Trauma bonding can occur in various abusive relationships, not only in hostage situations. It can often be seen in cults, in domestic violence, and even in toxic friendships. So it is really important to have good understanding of what trauma bonding is when we want to help someone to break free from this cycle of abuse. While Stockholm Syndrome is widely recognized, it's not without its criticism. Some psychologists argue that the term oversimplifies complex trauma response and can be used to blame or even pathologize victims. Others point out that not all hostages or abuse survivors develop Stockholm Syndrome, and the factors that contribute to it are still not fully understood. As Stockholm Syndrome is enlisted within DSM-5, this led to debates about whether Stockholm Syndrome should be considered as a disorder or simply as a manifestation of other trauma-related conditions such as PTSD. If you or someone you know has experienced Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding, it is important to seek professional help. Therapy can provide a safe space to process the trauma, rebuild the self-esteem, and also to develop healthier relationship patterns. And here are also a few ways how you can support someone who is a survivor of, for instance, trauma bonding. So first of all, we need to validate their experience. We mustn't judge them, and we also must acknowledge the complexity of what they're going through, and especially complexity of their emotions. Secondly, we can also encourage professional help. So there are many therapy treatments that are trauma focused, such as EMDR or CBT, that can actually make real impact for the person who survived trauma. Lastly, we can also help people to promote their self-care, and this can be done by fostering self-compassion. Self-compassion can be achieved by simply journaling, meditation, and even by joining any support groups. Stockholm Syndrome is a powerful reminder of the human mind's ability to adapt to extreme circumstances. While it is a complex and often misunderstood phenomenon, it sheds light on the profound impact of the trauma and also the resilience of our human spirit. If you found this video helpful, then please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who you think might benefit from it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're not gonna miss out on any future videos I'm gonna be uploading about the fascinating world of psychology. And as always, if you have any questions, if you have any topics that you would like me to cover, please let me know about it in the comments below. And I'm gonna see you in the next one then. Thank you. Bye bye.